Okay, good morning again, Redeemer. So, we looked yesterday at the way in which the early church, there was such a sudden dramatic change in the way people ministered. It was no longer the upfront leaders who determined the health of the church. It was very much down to every member in the church. Now, I'm old enough to remember part of the last century, and I can remember the Reformation and the restoring that took place in the church around about the 1960s, 1970s, and it was a remarkable time, and it was driven by people finding a new freedom in being baptized in the Holy Spirit. So just like the early church, that generated something quite remarkable. In the 60s and 70s, it also generated something quite remarkable. And I can remember thinking, I was at such a privileged position to experience this radical change from a formal church life where there was one minister up the front doing all the ministering and people just sat and listened. And then there was this restoration of relationship, of gathering together in people's homes. And it was an exciting time. It was radical and it was different, but it was driven by the infilling and the baptism of the Holy Spirit. And just like in the early church, what we see happening is that fairly soon that radical nature of the church going from house to house was changed when the church in the first few centuries became a bit more political. It lost that sense of excitement, and then the priesthood became the elite. The priesthood became the professionals, and people were just going along to church and being part of it, but there wasn't that involvement. And in the same way, after the 1970s, when churches started to grow and our sort of churches became much, much bigger, there was a sort of a change into the bigger meeting, the big gatherings, the thousands of people gathering together in one place. And that has all suddenly stopped because of the lockdown. And so that's caused us to rethink. It's caused us to go back thinking, well, have we sort of left something behind? Now, the early church, it took until, well, a long time, a few centuries, before we really understood what was going on. And there's a danger that we may fall into that trap, that actually church is Sunday morning. It's the big gathering. That's where it all happens. That's where we center our fellowship. That's where we come together. Whereas maybe if there's something that God is speaking to us about over the last few months, it's a challenging of that idea. It's a coming together of thinking, well, what is church? How do we do it without a place to meet? I read recently an expression which goes that crisis accelerates change. Crisis accelerates change. And with the lockdown, we find ourselves in a situation where we've had to rapidly rethink how we do church. And this is an evolving process. It's not that we know all the answers. We're going through the process of thinking, so what happens next? How do we do this? And we'll think about that a little bit more in the next session tomorrow.